Hi, I'm Tom Henriksen from Code is Easy, where we equip technical professionals with human skills. And welcome to our career transition webinar. I want to share with you part of a speech I'm working on. After that, we have a few questions that we can work through. My first job out of college, it seems like yesterday. I started at Wallace. What is Wallace, you say? We sold business forms and office supplies in Des Moines, Iowa, kind of like Dunder Mifflin. Armed with a business management degree and no real idea, I had three job options. I could sell insurance, or I could sell life insurance, or I could sell business forms. So I did what any sane person would do. I sold business forms. Who wants to call on our friends' parents for insurance anyways? Did I mention that Des Moines, Iowa is the insurance capital of the world? Back to my first day at Wallace. Can you believe I had to make a few cold calls before lunch? I was given three prospects from another sales representative to call on. Hello, is Mike Huff available? Can you tell him that Tom Henriksen called? Oh, tell him I'm from Wallace. Click. Whew. All right. Hello, is this Mr. Hegna? Mr. Hegna, this is Tom Henriksen, your new Wallace representative. Oh, sorry, Mr. Hegna. I apologize if our label soft product. Click. I guess we got disconnected there. All right, one more and we can go to lunch. What? Do we call on gentlemen's clubs? My coworkers all die laughing. Turns out this is their way of initiating new sales representatives. My sales techniques were not appreciated, similar to Tommy Boy. And soon after my first day in sales, I started to realize this wasn't going anywhere. Lucky for me, a friend from high school had reached out and shared with me the opportunity in technology. So I began to pursue a different path and get a new degree. I began work as a developer. Now, working as a developer is quite a bit different than working in sales. The sales office I worked in was always full of people. They would be talking on the phones to customers or talking to each other. The developers I worked with, they were a quiet bunch on the whole. So Friday afternoon in the sales office, the newest rep had to run across the street and get beer for everyone. Friday afternoon with the developers was quiet, just like the rest of the week. Now, perhaps it's starting to sound like I didn't want to make this change, but that was not the case. I slowly began to realize I was more Spock than Jimmy Fallon. The quiet, contemplative work of a developer suited me more. So as I began my work in technology, I started to learn lots of different things. I worked on a lot of old technologies at the time. I wanted to move into something more current. I began to hear a lot of buzz around the Java language. During my free times on nights and weekends, I went through tutorials and read up on Java. All this work paid off a few months later when a company leader came to me and said, Tom, would you be able to help Dave with the new application? Turned out they needed someone who could write an application using Java. I, of course, agreed. Like Luke beginning to use the Force. I was starting with some basics. Now that is from a speech called Humans Are Hard, Code is Easy. And I've been working on that speech and putting that together. And I think that part, I think, really talks to us about our options in our career transitions. So I think it's important to think about that as we look at our careers and understand the value in those career transitions. So here's a few questions that I want you to take some time and think about. Where have you gone through a transition? So, for instance, as you heard in this speech, I didn't start out in IT. I started out in sales. Now, people may think, well, you wasted your time in sales and that wasn't anything I didn't learn anything there. But I don't look at it that way. I think a few things I learned in sales were some of the processes they use and the things you need to do to sell something. Also, to the importance of the influence. These are skills that we still use today in technology or whatever. You don't have to be in sales to try to influence somebody. For instance, if you listen to the whole speech, I even tell a story about a time that I tried to influence a corporate leader in technology about how we needed to use a new technology. Now, one thing I learned this, excuse me, really quickly is that I made a mistake in realizing, what does somebody want out of this? A corporate leader might want, depending on what department they're in, might look at things differently than, say us IT people. So for instance, I'm a developer. I might think, oh, this is a new shiny tool. I want to use this new technology. A corporate leader won't look at it that way. They will look at it, is this going to help us, close more customers or whatever KPIs they might be looking at, or it might be something from the bottom line. So you have to think about things in terms of who you're talking to. That's one of the things I learned in sales. Of course, I've, sometimes forget those and need to relearn them, but it's important to do that. And I think that's something, if you have some things to share, please feel free to reach out. I'll put my email address out there for people to check in with me if they have questions. I think this is something good, though, an exercise for us all to think about. One other thing is, what have you learned through your career transitions? So one of the things I've learned in my transitions, like I mentioned, through sales, there's other things I did, before college that I learned things. But for instance, I learned about the style of work that I thrive best in. For instance, the sales work was a different environment that I, really thrived in. For instance, doing more with working with more people, calling people. Sometimes I remember in sales, I felt like I was bothering people, but realizing that, even today, when you want to influence somebody, you might have to, put yourself out there, share an opinion. Maybe it's going to be something that someone might not like, but be open to feedback too, and changing your approach. That's one thing that I've learned going through some different journeys in my career. For instance, using some agile techniques, learning how to take feedback, adjusting, your approach with different people. So for instance, like one of the things I learned too in sales, that I was more of an introvert and needed to kind of understand what a challenge that was for me and how to use that. For instance, as I talked about, being more like Spock than Jimmy Fallon in the speech. Those are things that we think about, taking time, thinking about your career path, maybe your career journey. Maybe, for instance, you're starting out in technology, but think about some other things you did. Maybe you did some things in college just to make some money. Maybe you did some things in high school to a summer job. There might be some things that you learned in any of those that you might take on and think about, maybe something you don't want to do, you didn't like it, or maybe there's some things that you want to see if you can add that into your current career path. So as you look at your career transitions, think through the lens like that. So I really appreciate you joining us, and I want to thank you for joining us for the Code is Easy Career Transition webinar.